Hi, I'm Dr. Christopher Barker. Welcome to Holding Space. I'm a clinical psychologist from New Jersey. I do these podcasts as a way of introducing some ideas or talking about some things that might be meaningful to people, sort of explaining some psychological concepts and also exploring some ideas that are out there in the community and seeing if they have validity. I mean, there are some things that are showing up as mental health related issues that really are being misunderstood. Again, I can't speak for everybody in the world. I can only explain what I know as a psychologist. And I do try to stay current with interesting topics. Today, I posted something on LinkedIn and I said I was going to do a podcast about it. So I said, I'm going to do a podcast about it. So here I am. I talked about a book by Daniel Yom called A Trick of the Mind. And it's really very interesting. It would take me several podcasts to get through all the key concepts, but I really liked what he said about shared language because this is something that I've talked about on these podcasts before and to anybody who will listen. Basically, when I was teaching, I used to talk about there's two levels of reality. There's the objective level, which is what anybody can see and validate as true. This is a computer screen I'm looking at. This is a camera. But there's a subjective level of experience also, which is this camera can be terrifying to people. This computer can be aggravating to people. It is to me at times. And that subjective level is more where we operate than on anything objective. In fact, Yom goes so far as to say there probably isn't really anything that is objective reality because our brains are being creative with our environment and also with other people that we come into contact with. So most of what we know comes from a shared perception of reality. Perception is not purely sensory, it's inferential. Our brain fills in the gaps for things that we do not fully understand. And this is why he talks about the difference between what we see and what hallucinations are. What we see is based on something we're perceiving outside of ourselves and a shared reality that other people can also take part in. And when we hallucinate, it's an image, but it is something that is based entirely on our own internal frame of reference. Or when we hear something, it's based on our own internal frame of reference. We can hear a sound, but instead of hearing the sound as it is, our brain does a thing where it makes something else out of the sound. It makes it into a voice. That's sort of like, again, the like 10-cent explanation for this. And I probably will be going into this in some detail in other podcasts because I really think this has a lot of implications. A lot of our prior knowledge comes from social learning. It comes from our culture. It comes from our collective experience. And there is such a thing as collective experience. We all share something. And so there's intergenerational knowledge that gets passed down. There's a certain amount of biological carryover, a certain amount of genetic carryover. We do have some shared perceptions. However, culture and language make a big difference because I mentioned before about the issue of metaphors. If I metaphor something like, John is a weasel, what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean that he's really a furry musteliate. It means that he's kind of sneaky. Things we associate with being a weasel. My son has had ferrets and they're not particularly sneaky. They're pretty obvious, but they will steal things. So that is something that, again, if you had any experience with ferrets and weasels, you know what that means. Communication helps us correct our mental models. So if we're communicating with other people, we're also correcting and adjusting the mental models that we have inside of ourselves so that we can apply more meaning to it. Shared communication and language allows us to compare our communication with other people. It allows us to notice mismatches between what we're saying or hearing and what other people are saying or hearing. It allows us to update our internal models. This is especially important in relationships and in work relationships as well as personal relationships, where misaligned predictions about others' intentions can lead to conflict. Well, what did you mean by that? Is a valid question. I can go off for some time thinking you meant something, but you really didn't. Or thinking that something means something that it really doesn't. Shared meaning reduces uncertainty. Yam did research at the Uncertainty Lab, focusing on how our brain deals with ambiguity. Shared language and perception reduce uncertainty by providing stable categories. This is a threat. This is safe. This is a joke. Without those categories, we're not really certain how to take some things that come at us. And also, shared language also allows us to have social cues that help us interpret ambiguous situations. When we have something that's happening around us and we're not really sure what it is, why are those people talking in loud voices? Are they arguing? Or are they, in fact, actually just really excited about something? What's the tone? What's the inflection? What's the language? That's part of the category. It helps us create predictable patterns of interaction. Well, every time I see this guy in the hallway, he's going to try to give me a high five and be joking with me. So I know that the things that he says are going to be a joke. In a world where the brain constantly seeks to minimize prediction error, and we are always trying to create and complete. A friend of mine is actually writing a book about how our brain likes completion. And if we don't have a completion, the things that it does in creating the circles, hopefully I'll be able to get her to come on here and talk about that some. Creating meaning is a powerful stabilizer. So reality is co-authored is what we should take from this. The central claim, the brain constructs reality, has a social counterpart. Reality is co-constructed through shared language, shared expectations, shared perceptions. We don't just perceive the world individually. Our eyes are not cameras. They take in an image, but we negotiate it collectively. What we see is a partial creation of what we're interpreting. And also, so it's based on what's internal. It's also based on what we already know. And it's based on what may be coming with that particular image. He did an experiment with, or recounts an experiment that they had people who are on the autism spectrum create an animation, and they compared the animations that they created to animations that people who are not neurodivergent created. And the autistic people looking at the quote unquote normal animations couldn't figure out what was going on because they have an entirely different frame of reference. And people who are not neurodivergent looking at the autistic videos could not understand what was going on because they don't have the same frame of reference. So there is a certain amount of internal wiring that's going on in here, but also cultural differences shape perception. What people are and what situations are, partly determined by our culture. Miscommunication feels destabilizing. If we don't understand what somebody's getting at with something, then we feel confused. We can be upset. We can become angry because that confusion comes out in all kinds of ways. And also, shared language allows us to share narratives, science, religion, politics, identity. These things are so powerful because they are part of the group collectiveness that we create. And this group collectiveness, this shared meaning, becomes really important. It's something that we hold on to tightly, and it partly explains why some people are so hard to it's so hard to make them change their minds. It's so hard to negotiate a change in their perception. This is something that's a bedrock of their experience. Social Social isolation can distort perception because you're no longer using that shared model of reality. You're using your own internal framework of reality. You are using all that's inside, and it may have been contributed to by others, but the more we become isolated from other people, the more we become isolated from current meanings. I think we got a good example of that during the pandemic, and when a lot of people were spending a lot of time away from other people, and they were taking all their meaning of things that were going on through the internet. We saw some like really unusual behaviors and perceptions of things. Our minds are not sealed containers. They're prediction engines. They're constantly calibrating by other people. So that feedback from other people is really critical. Perception is predictive. The brain builds models and fills in gaps. We never see raw reality. It always has some meaning attached to it. And if we can understand what something is, then we just will use what we've got. Um, Picasso, his Cubist art was partly based on African masks and partly based on, European art. So again, when you look at a Picasso painting, you may be repulsed by it, you may be intrigued by it, you may ascribe a meaning to it that may be very different from what the meaning of the painting originally was. Language aligns mental models. So shared descriptions reduce ambiguity. Communication becomes a tool for shared reality. And shared meaning reduces uncertainty. Prediction craves stability. Social coordination depends on common understanding. We need to have that much in common, which means we need each other and we need to keep talking to each other. And that's partly why I do this stuff. I like it better when I'm doing with somebody else. So we will probably have a guest on next time. And in the meantime, I've talked at you long enough. Thank you for holding space for me while I discuss A Trick of the Mind by Daniel Young, and also the meanings of reality and how we perceive reality and what language means to us. Frequent themes of mine. You may be tired of them by now. If so, skip over. However, if you're not tired of them, and if you have something you want to contribute, please leave a comment. Hit like, subscribe to follow more of these. If you like this kind of content, if you want something different, if you want to hear about something, if there's something that you're intrigued by and you want me to talk about, or if there's something that you take issue with, please let me know. Thank you for holding space for me. I will see you soon.